Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining for today's first class of Architectural 3D Visualization course. We are from Montreal Institute, and today is the beginning of the course, and we will be teaching you all SketchUp, V-Ray, and Lumion together, all three together, right? So the first session is for free. Y'all can have a look at it and y'all can comment and y'all can get an idea of what we are going to do for today and for the rest of the class during this program. Mr. Danish, can you move to the next slide? Yeah. So today's agenda, I will be introducing you to our lecturer and then what we are going to do. And then y'all can ask at the end of the session of this lecture, you can ask question and answer sessions from our resource person. So today what we'll be learning is importance of 3D visualization, introduction to 3D modeling and 3D modeling with SketchUp, and you will be looking into the V-Ray and what are the other courses that Montreal Institute is offering you. So when you look at our courses, we do mostly professional based courses such as certificate in product designing, architectural 3D visualization using these three softwares that you are going to do, and Revit architecture with BIM, then structural analysis using SAP 2000 and ETABS, and also we have Oracle Primavera course, Keyshots and SolidWorks we do teach, also CAD program, and then also we have interior and spatial designing. Also, we do offer dual qualifications as well. So meantime, we recently started another program of StatPro, which is another program of structural design and analysis. So 3D Max, everything is offered through our institution. So we hope that this session will be really fruitful for you all. And our resource person is we have conducted already 3 batches of architectural 3D visualization course. And our certification is from UK. And our resource person, if you can have a look at all the projects, he is well qualified and Moratua University graduate. So here, I hand it over to you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. Yeah, okay. Thanks for that introduction, ma'am. So I'll be your tutor for this course throughout the 2 months of this entire course program. So today, since we decided to have a demonstration lecture, a demonstration session, so you can get an idea of what will you be learning, right, throughout this entire course. So we don't want to, do some basic introduction on 3D modeling or how the software works, things. We wanted to pull something out from a middle module. So as you see here, yeah. So here it's called the interior lighting by using V-Ray. So it's not a first lecture or first module in this course. We wanted you to have a look at what extent that you can learn. Right? So you don't have to worry whether you know the software, the V-Ray or SketchUp or this advanced technical stuff for now. You can just look at how it works. Okay, you can just get an idea of what you can go through this course. Right. So when we talk about this lighting, actually, and we have subtopic here, it says basic photographic approach. Okay, so this rendering or architectural visualization is basically photograph. So we're going to take photographs of the models that we built using SketchUp. So when we use a DSLR or a professional camera in real life, there are some certain rules and certain standards that we have to follow if anyone of you have experiencing photography or cinematography, something like that, you will know these basic things, how lighting works. And lighting is an important thing, okay, in any of the cinematography or architectural visualization or in photography. That is the thing, or that is the element that's going to determine the realism or the realistic level of the render that you're going to make. Okay, so we call it basically cinematic lighting. Okay, so we adapt those techniques that those professionals use in cinema, filmmaking, and we're going to adapt that lighting method in our rendering process. So we just quickly go through some of the examples, and we'll do a demo scene with SketchUp and V-Ray and see how, let's see how the light is going to work there. So here you have a very famous scene, right? It's from the film Titanic, and we have a heading cinematic lighting. We're going to analyze how the lightings work in this specific scene here. Now it's pretty simple when we look at this, right? So the camera is placed at the center of these two actors, right? So we have a sunlight coming on. Basically, it's an evening time or something. We can get that idea of it's an evening time. So the sun source, the source of light is here, and the sunlight is coming through, and it slightly falls over these two actors. That's pretty straightforward. But the actual scenario, the technical scenario, is much more complicated, right? Now here how it works. Now, this is a small graphical representation of how this specific scene was lit up. So actually, there was no actual sun. So the art directors or the lighting professionals, they have to manipulate these lights to get that natural light setting, right? To make us feel that the scene is going on an evening time. So they need to place these very powerful sunbeams or any kind of light sources, focus lights, to simulate the sunlight, right? And the actors here and the camera is placed at the center to create that symmetrical viewpoint. And then they also have this, we call it floppy or just a black screen to control the light. So the sunlight or there's supposed to be the sunlight is difference in intensity for this window and this window. And we have another thing here, it's called bounce board, or it says fill. We normally call it as a fill light. Right? So we'll see how this light or these elements work later. And almost in every cinematic sceneries, whether they try to manipulate an indoor scene and they try to show it's happening in a daytime, they never use the accurate or the real sun. They need to manipulate these lights. Now this is a render here, right? This is the professional V-Ray render. Now how do we get this kind of very crisp and realistic or real looking images, renders? See, there's a small batch here or a certificate. They said 5 SRW. Okay, we'll explain that later. Now that's the challenge. How to create these lights? It doesn't feel awkward or it doesn't feel uncomfortable. Everything seems perfect where the light focuses, where the darkness is, right? How soft these shadows are. That is the thing that we need to learn of how to use these light settings. Now this is what we have to go through this course. It says 5 SRW. Now this 5 SRW is one of the professional method in architectural visualization. Now this 5 SRW is offered by the professionals, which means the creators of V-Ray. They offer these courses, but we can get the idea from them, right? So they basically say there's a 5 method way to get a professional or a realistic render. So first one is framing. Okay, so we leave that part that comes under the SketchUp and other things. And here second one is the light balance, where a lot of things come into that. We have to spend a lot of time discussing and correcting of these light balances. And then third one is the material, and then final render, and also with a post production. So post production means you can use either V-Ray post production element or Photoshop, or if it's a video render, we can use Adobe Premiere Pro or any other video editing software. That's what we call the post production. So all these elements come together so you can create a good looking, a professional looking render. So this is what basically a studio light works. Now there are so much complex arrangements in cinema. Okay, so you don't have to worry about this. It's the very simplified graphical representation of how this 3-point lighting is going to work. So which means basically there are 3 light sources. Okay, so we have the key light. In most of the cases, we have the key light going to be the sun. Okay. Either it can be the real sun or some light sources that can manipulate the sunlight. And we have the backlight and we have the fill light. So this fill light and key light always going to focus or always going to be in front of the subject. So when we take the filmography, cinema, the subject is most of the time the characters, right? People. So to highlight the human figure, we need this backlight. So that's not the scenario in architectural visualization, because in this field, we never highlight any human figures. They are just a part of the entire scene. So we don't use this. We ignore this backlight in most of the time in ArchViz. But fill light and key light are the most important things. And just basic explanation why how this light works. So what are these lights for? So key light is the primary light source. That's a most powerful light source or the most intense light source. And fill light is of course, and it says to cancel the shadow of the key light. Just imagine a sun. Okay, a sun maybe in the noon, in 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. In that time, sun is so much powerful and creates a very intense light, which results in a very dark negative space, which means the shadow. So that won't look good when we see a frame or when we see a photography. We need to reduce that darkness. So to smooth out that negative space created by the key source or the key light source, we use a fill light. Right? And backlight is just for highlighting the object. That is not necessary at all the time. Okay, now that's enough for the introduction. So we'll just move on to uh, a scene here, right? So here you can see, hope you can see this SketchUp. Okay, here's it's a simple scene. It's a kitchen, right? It's all materials were here and it's arranged on a specific way. And we're going to manipulate or we're going to create the lighting for this scene. So first, if you remember the 5SR method, the first one is the framing, of course. So that's already done here. We will learn these framing techniques later, the entire course. Now we'll go for the lighting. Okay. Now don't just go worry how this asset editor or V-Ray tools work. Just focus on how the light can change this entire scene. Or in other words, how can we achieve a certain moods or certain feelings in this render by using light, right? Okay. Now here, this is the category for lights. So whatever the light source we have in this SketchUp, it will be appearing in this column. So now just only one light, which is the sunlight. Okay. So by default, SketchUp have a sun. Now if you ever familiar with SketchUp before, you have this option here. It says shadow to create shadow, which means there's a sun by default. Okay. And we 3D artists have a common practice. It's a technique or a stage before doing the light balance. We do a material override render. Now don't just get bothered what its mean is. It's going to take all the materials out and going to render in just plain white. Okay, so I'm just quickly go through a sample render and I'll show you how this clay render or this material override render works. Okay, so now you can see it's pretty dark. We'll work on the lights later, right? You can't see any of the materials in any of the surfaces. See, everything is white, just pure white. The reason we use these kind of white color renders for creating light balance is there are two types of light, right? First one is direct light and there is indirect light. Basically, we can categorize all the available lights into that two categories. So direct light is the light rays coming from a light source, maybe from a sun or a light fixture, right? Those are direct lights. The light rays that gets reflected from the material. Why? Because all the materials, all the surface somehow going to reflect some amount of light. That's how we see the objects, right? If you can see a certain object, which means that object is reflecting some amount of light to your eyes. So which means all the materials that we see can reflect the light, which means that reflected light going to affect the direct light. So when we do this stage, the light balance, we don't have to uh, have that indirect light. We only need the direct light. So in other words, we don't want to have all those materials. If we have the materials, the light source going to get reflected from those materials. So to avoid that, to avoid the indirect lighting, we use this material override render. Okay, that's the thing. Now you can see there is no light here. It's pretty dark. That's not how we want our final render. So let's see. Now here we have the sunlight. Now pretty much we'll do another short render. Now we can see the sun ray here. Now this sun ray or the sunlight is in the control of SketchUp itself, right? Let me show you this one. So when I change the time in the SketchUp plugin, it's going to change the sunlight. See? So which means this sun is in the control of the SketchUp. That's how the SketchUp sun works. But it's still pretty dark. We can't see any of the details here. It's completely dark and blackout. We can only see this small piece of area in this entire scene. That's not what we wanted. So let's just stop this. And in the sunlight option, okay, you don't have to get so confused of how this works. There's a small button disabled here which says custom orientation, right? So if I enable that, the sun in the SketchUp is no longer under the control of the SketchUp. Now we call it as the V-ray sun. Now the sun, the direction, the time of the day is going to be controlled by the V-ray itself. We call it V-ray sun. Right? That is normally we don't keep the sun under the control of SketchUp because SketchUp doesn't have that much of customizations. So we take control of the sun with using V-ray asset editor. And still, even if you take the control of the sun, we still don't have enough light. Why? Because we only have the key light source here. If you can remember the 3-point lighting, we need two more lights, right? The fill light and also the backlight. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add one by one, and let's see which light setting will be more suitable. Okay, now let's get to this position. Now sun is in the top, that doesn't matter. Now we need to have a fill light, right? As in the 3-point lighting, the next one is the fill light. So our camera was in this position somewhere here, right? That's how we saw this frame. So the fill light should be placed along the camera side. It should focus to this table here. Let's assume now this table is our subject. Okay. Now this is the interesting part. For fill light, there are so much of options in industry, in cinema industry. they can use a direct light, a huge light panel which is covered by a paper or a cloth, right? Or else they use a plain white color board, just board. It's not a light source, it's just a board, just to control the light. So here we're going to use a rectangle light as a light fill, right? Those are the types of lights. We learn that in the entire course later, right? Now this here is my fill light, and I'm going to focus this to my subject here, which is the table. That's pretty fine. And now there are some more customization that I have to do for this fill light or this rectangle light. First one is I have to make this light invisible. Why? Because this is not an exact physical light. We do this just to manipulate or just to get some more brightness inside the scene. So technically there are no lights should exist in this place. So that's why we need to make it invisible. Yeah, so that's the first customization we need to do. And then there are some characters, or there are some we call it normally, this light can affect certain characters of the material or the scene. See, it says affect diffuse, affect specular, affect reflection, affect atmosphere. So the diffuse means simply the material, okay, or the color. Don't get too confused. Diffuse means the color. So this light have to affect the diffuse. If you turn that off, which means there's no light. You can see it in the preview. So that has to be enabled all the time. Now we can disable this specular. Now specular means, take a look at these side walls here. Okay, in the preview, take a look at these side walls. When I turn this off, the reflection is gone. That's what we need. Why? Because if now, for example, if this is a marble, that's going to reflect all the objects in front of it, right? So in the final render, this light source, this rectangle light, can be reflected in this marble. That's not what we want. So we just disable the specular, and also you can disable the reflection if you want. That doesn't make any huge differences. And atmospherics, that just disable or enable. That's an advanced thing. You can just keep enable the atmospherics. So only thing is you need to disable specular, and also of course make the light invisible. Now we have a fill light. Let's rename this rectangle as a fill. Now let's go back to our scene, and the fill light intensity. Of course, every light that we're going to add will have an intensity. By default, it has a 30. Now let's not change that and check whether the 30 is enough or not. So let's do another render. Now that's a quite an improvement in the entire lighting, right? So now we can see some details in here, but still there are some black spots. But comparing to the previous version, now the scene is pretty much clear, right? Now how should I know which intensity of that fill light will have a better effect, right? Like, do change every value and do all the test renders again and again? No, that's not the way. There's a special tool in V-Ray to do those kind of minor adjustments. So that's called the light mix. Okay, we learned this in the entire course, the original course, of course. Now here, in this light mix, okay, that's an advanced tool in V-Ray to control the light within a render. See, so all the lights that we use, will appear in this column. So we can control, we can have all the control, like we can enable or disable, right? We can control the intensity, and if I see, I can control the intensity, or I can even control the color, right? So that is the use of this light mix option. So from this, I'm going to calculate, or I'm going to check different amounts or different values to make the perfect light fill, right? So here's the light fill. Now it's in 1 by default. Let's type 2, right? Maybe it's up to you. You shouldn't have high intensity fill lights, right? Something like this doesn't make the render look so good, because you know your focus is going towards the fill light rather than going towards the sunlight. So that's not what we wanted. We our focus need to get to the sunlight, but at the same time we need some a clear image in the other side also. So let's say 2 here. For now, let's just assume 2 is enough. Okay. So once you change the value in this light mix, you also have to change the value in the original light. Now, how to match these two values? Now, here's 30 and here's 2. So now I jumped from 1 to 2, which means 2 times, right? So here I need to change this to 60, which means 2 times. So if I change this to 5, which means 30 into 5, that amount. It's kind of a multiplication type. So I change this to 60 and then again come back to the 1 here and do the render once again. Now that seems pretty okay, but still we can improve the scene by adding more lights, or maybe changing the sunlight pattern or the length of the sunlight. If you feel this the length of the sunlight is not enough, right, we can go to the sunlight and we make this a little bit more like this. Yeah, now that can make a pretty good render. Now, what are the lights that we used? We used a primary light, or a key light, if you prefer, and a fill light. Right? Now, that's not the only light that should or that's supposed to exist in this scene. Why? Because we have other light sources here. In a kitchen, this is a kitchen scene, right? So we have this a modern light pendant here, and we have some ceiling lights. We call it bar lights or magnetic lights, whatever the official term you use, or spotlights even. And we can have the the LED stripe over this pantry top. Usually in kitchens we use that kind of light. So there are other light sources that exist in this scene. So light balance is balancing all those lights, not just the key source and the fill, right? So now what we're going to do is start adding all the lights one by one. So let's start from this pendant here. I just mentioning the word pendant, but it's not actually a pendant, but some kind of. So here we have the pendant light here. Now this is another thing. What kind of light should we add to these pendant lights? Okay, so here we have one, two, three, four, like 4 or 5 types of lights in V-Ray, like the rectangle light that we used for the fill light, right? And we have this sphere light and spotlight and IES and omni light. And dome light is not actually a light. We'll learn that later, how dome light works. And also the mesh light. Now this mesh light is the prominent one that we mostly use this mesh light. That is, and it says like convert to mesh light, right? That means we can convert any element or any groups into a light. That's what it means, convert to mesh light. So what I'm going to do is, now this is a group, right? That's what we call a group. I'm going to turn this into a light. I have to turn this into a light because that's a existing light source. So I just click this and you can see there's a small icon appearing around this light source, right? Which means now it's going to act as a light source. Now if we check the lights, here the mesh light is now appearing. We'll change the name into maybe pendant, and we'll change the color. We don't want the white color, we'll with a slightly orange this color, and 30 we'll change that to 50. Now if you know the exact value or the intensity of the light, now for example if you had a chance to work with the actual building, like it's going to get constructed and you had the power to create the accurate 3D visualization of it, you need to get those details from the client or the architect or the interior designer that you're working with. So what is the power of that light that you're using? What is the color of that light? Right? The visualization should be accurate as possible. Now here units, for now I'm using default, but you can, if it's a real light, you can have the in watt or lumens. You can get this amount from the original light that they're going to use. For now we'll take the default at 50. Now let's check that render once again. Okay. Now we can see a slight glow in this bar, right? In this pendant light. If you want to check that, we can use our light mix tool here. And where's the pendant? Okay, here. So it slightly affects the furnitures under the light. So if we feel that is not enough, we'll try increasing this, or maybe 10, something like that. Now this is the process that we call light balancing or light mixing. So we need to check, we need to apply all the lights in the scene, and we need to check with the different combinations of which combination suits the more realistic look, right? Or sometimes if you feel this sunlight is too uh, attention seeking, that gets all the attention from the other light sources, we can disable it. And let's just check. So here we have the sunlight, we can just disable the sunlight and check the other one. So that will create a moody or a kind of a cloudy or rainy day. Yes, is someone asking a question? If you have any questions, you can ask. Right. So you have these tools to make a perfect combination of lights, right? So now for me, I'll say I'll just going to disable this sun. I don't want this sunlight. I need the fill light and this main pendant to create a calm or a cozy interior looking. So I'll just disable this, and pendant 10 seems not enough. Let's see for 20, something like this. That might looks better. So 20 means 20 times, right? So in the pendant, let's see, 1000 is way too much. Let's go for 650. And let's do the render again. That might feel good. So we have the fill light, we have the pendant light. Now we need to add more lights like the LED stripe, the spotlights, and if we need, we can add another fill light somewhere in the opposite side of the camera. That's up to you. You can use more than one fill lights, right, to create the perfect looking render. Now there's another thing you should know. Now, what is this environment self illumination and this rest option is, right? Okay. Now here we have the sunlight, and see what happens when I turn off this environment option, right? So what happens? There's a reduction in light with that blue color. Right? It's kind of a bluish color light is going off. So that is what we call as global illumination. So you will get to know about these terminologies better when we start from the beginning, one, from SketchUp and introduction to V-Ray. You will get the meaning of what global illumination means. Now, just for a basic idea, global illumination means the indirect light created by the sun, right? So which means the environment itself will reflect some of the light. Even if we can't see the sun in a rainy day, we still get the light, right? So it's not the direct light from the sun, but from the atmosphere and the clouds and the dust particles we have in the atmosphere. So all those things create or reflect some of the lights. We call that global illumination. That's what here mentioned as the environment. So I just turn everything off. Okay. So this is how sunlight will look like without global illumination, which is not practically possible. If there's sunlight, there's also environment. But we can turn off the sunlight and just keep the environment. That is possible. That's up to you. So self-illumination means, uh, okay, we'll come back to that later. Self-illumination. Rest is something like, it's more of a indirect lights. Right? It created by the light sources. If you remember the first thing I've told, the direct and indirect lights. So the rest means the indirect lights created by the light source, this artificial light source. Okay. So since we don't have any, the rest doesn't make any difference. And we don't need sunlight. Okay, let's assume. And we have the fill light and we have the pendant. Right now that seems pretty fine. That seems smooth, right? We can't say, we don't have any dark black spots. We can see all the details that we're supposed to have, right? Now that's not just it. Let's try and add further lights. Now here there's another important light, the pantry top. We usually have that kind of LED stripes under these cupboards, right? So for LED lights we're going to use the rectangle light. You can slightly take, okay. Now we need to customize that rectangle light. We'll rename it as LED. And normally we use a bright orange or a bright yellow color light for that. And you can keep it invisible or visible. It's not just a big deal because practically we can visually see the LED stripe. Or in some houses, they're going to hide the LED stripe under some any material. So we can't see the light, we can only get the light source. Sorry, we can't see the light source, we can only get the light. It's up to you. So for now, let's make it invisible, right? And we don't have to change any of the things. Why? Because it's actually an existing light, so it's going to affect all the specular reflection and everything. And then we'll add the same LED stripe under this table. Now these are decorative lights, right? It depends on the client, it depends on the designer. Let's make everything 80. Now we have a pretty good dramatic lighting effect, which is suitable for a kitchen, and yet we can again control these LED light intensities. Maybe this is a little more brighter. Yeah, and pantry, that's enough, I guess. If you don't feel enough, you can discuss it with your client, and if he feels that is enough, or if your designer feels that's enough, that's perfectly fine. Now let's add some more lights for these spotlights here, right? Or focus light or bar light or whatever you name it. Now that's we call we're going to use a new asset, which is the IES light, right? So IES means basically the spotlight, but with some uh, shapes. Now let me show you this one. So this is what IES looks like. So have you seen these kind of lights, right, with different shapes of light beams? Usually we use this near a wall, right, to get beautiful dramatic lighting effects, or under the swimming pool, or even from the top focus light, right? So these are decorative lights. We technically call it IES. So here I'm going to use an IES. So once I can select, so I'll go for number 25, and I'll place inside this light. Now that's how the IES light works. You pick the first spot, and then you pick the second spot where it should focus, right? Right. Let's copy and paste this, and let's group everything. Right. Now we can slightly see those lights. We can, of course, increase the intensity. And let's change the color of this, just for example. And if you don't like the shape of it, you can obviously change whenever you want. You can download thousands of IES shapes for free in so many websites, right? There are so much of websites you can download these kind of assets, and that's how IES works. And then what else? Right, so that's a kind of a basic thing, right? If you want to create a, a pretty decent looking render, that is the basic lighting method. So you need a sun along with the environment, so you can have the direct sunlight or just the environment light, that depends. So that comes under the key lighting source. And then you have a fill light, sorry, yes, you have a fill light, and you have all other light sources that actually exist in that scene. This is not just the all light balance in the entire V-Ray.
சரி.
Um, can you hear my voice?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. We had a power cut here. Uh, I think so. I got connected from my mobile phone, so there's no any other way to get it from my PC. So we need to wait till the power comes back. Um, if you have any questions related to this, what I have explained, you can ask when the power comes. You can have a small discussion if you like to. That's the problem these days. We can't just trust these things and do even a meeting these days, right?
Okay, sorry for that. That was a disaster. You can hear my voice, right? Okay, right. Um, Hope you can hear my voice. If you have any trouble hearing the voice, please let me know, at least in the chat box. Right then. Uh, so we were talking about how this light works. Now, Yeah, so we added this IES light, as I told you. It acts as a spotlight and it creates a shape, right, in the light beam. That's what we call an IES. Now, like this, you can have more lights. Like if you need a floor lamp here, right, or usually in this place, there should be something. We can have a rack or maybe a refrigerator or something related to this kitchen space. Anyway, so we'll check our, yeah. So this is how we do the light balance. Just a basic thing by using just couple of lights, the key lighting, fill light, and other necessary lights in the scene. That is light balancing. But if you feel the brightness is not enough, right, we have multiple ways to adjust that. The first one is we have this exposure. We can control the overall brightness by using this exposure. Contrast, which is the basic post-production things. This is not actually changing the intensity of each lights, but as a 2D image, we can change the overall brightness or the exposure. That is one simple method. But that's not very professional or convincing that if you want to increase the intensity of a specific light. Now, for example, let me, now you know what this environment means, right? Environment means the global illumination that is created by the sun. But let's assume that environment light is not enough. What you can do, you can increase the environment light like this, which means you are increasing the global illumination, right? You can increase the global illumination until you are satisfied with the overall brightness. So that is why, so the first one is exposure, the basic way where you can increase the environment, the intensity of global illumination like this. Or there's another standard procedure, which is the professional way, right? Or the proper way. If you download any scenes, any models like this from internet, sometimes you might see these rectangle lights that we used as a fill light here also exist in the outside of each window. Now this is how it works. Okay, we call it portal lights. Portal, portal lights. That is, now I go back to our presentation here. Now in this scene, take a look at this right side picture. In the two huge windows, they have some kind of settings, right? They have placed some cloth, white cloth covering the entire window, and behind it they have placed powerful focus lamps or some kind of lights, which is to enhance or to get the perfect or accurate sunlight simulation, or in technical terms we can call it to get the perfect global illumination, right? In ArchViz, or in this field, we call it as a portal lights. Portal lights help to enhance, or to help, it helps to take more control over this global illumination thing. Let me show you. Now I'll take this rectangle light and I'll place a rectangle light here. Right? Now this is a default rectangle light. Now it points away from the window. Now what I'm going to do is I'll rotate this towards the window and move this like this, right? And I'll adjust the width to match the width of this window, right? So it's pretty simple. I'm just placing an entire rectangle light behind the window, right? And the second rectangle light, I'll name it as a portal. Now this portal is very important thing, right? We'll make it invisible. Why? Because we don't want to see that huge white color panel outside our window, right? Why we do this? Only just to get additional brightness. So we make it invisible. And like we did for the fill light, we'll turn off the specular and reflections. And 30, let's see, for now let's keep it at the default value 30. And let's do a render. So now we have acquired an additional and controllable brightness from this portal, right? Now we can adjust this portal light maybe to 5 to increase the entire brightness without causing any blooms, right? You know the term blooms or highlight burns. In exposure option, you have three things: exposure, highlight burn, contrast. Now this highlight burn um, is a messy thing. Like it always messes up the entire scene. See, when I increase the highlight burn, see this, the environment or the sky, it gets too bright, right? And it's going to spoil the entire view. It's going to make some difficulties visually when looking at the picture. So we don't want that higher highlight burns. So what happens when you use this exposure to increase your overall brightness? You get that highlight burn a lot in all over the places. So that's why increase the exposure is not a professional way to get additional brightness. We always use additional lights. In technical terms, we call it as a portal lights to get additional brightness without causing that ugly highlight burn. So now, portal light is now in 1. In 5, you can get additional brightness. If 10, you still get additional brightness, but you can't see any highlight burns, right? But still get additional brightness. That is the important thing or a significant thing of having a portal light. So in SketchUp or in V-Ray, to manipulate this natural light, we have so much of lights combined to get that effect. So one is V-Ray light, then there's environment, and there's portal lights, and also the fill light. So all these lights combined and gives us a natural looking interior scene. Now for a beginner, right, for most of the beginners, this is a huge trouble how to get a perfect interior light. Now outdoor lighting is something different. You have the direct light from sunlight. You can't manipulate sunlight in an outdoor environment, right? Some advanced scenes may require, but normally for an exterior render, we already have direct sunlight, so it doesn't need any additional lights to manipulate that natural effect. But interior is the challenging part. How to create that natural looking interior, right? The same problem happens in Lumion too. Now Lumion, if you think this V-Ray is hard, now technical skill wise, Lumion is way more easier than V-Ray, but there's a problem with Lumion. The Lumion lights does not act accurately like in V-Ray. It does not create perfect shadows. It does not create perfect reflections. So it's pretty hard to get that realistic lighting in Lumion, right? Compared to when we compare the realism, V-Ray is much better and efficient, right, in creating interior lights. So that's why in this course, in this entire program too, this beginner program in 2 months, we're teaching outdoor or exterior rendering by using Lumion and interior rendering by using V-Ray, because the vice versa is really hard, which means it's really hard to create exterior rendering by using V-Ray, because you need exterior elements such as trees, roads, or soil, other natural elements. It's really hard to get, or it's really hard to model in SketchUp. But in Lumion, you already have an existing library. The Lumion have a huge library of natural assets like trees, rocks, water effect, fallen leaves, like that, animals, birds. So you have a huge library. You just have to drag and drop those things inside your scene. So it's way more easier to create exterior renders by using Lumion. At the same time, Lumion is hard, skill wise, to manipulate the interior scenes. So that's why for a beginner level, they teach exterior rendering by using Lumion and interior rendering by using V-Ray. Okay, so what you have learned, even if you don't understand any of this, you know how these things work, right? It's just not just modeling. Oh, modeling is a separate part. It's up to your own skill, and it's up to the design actually, like modeling part and how detailed you model the scene. Like here, we have these small details like the fruits, the plant, and how the materials work, right? Tiny details here and there. So modeling parts is completely up to you. But rendering, everyone needs to follow a standard procedure, a standard workflow to get that perfect realistic thing. And of course, the final product, the realism, is also depends on the modeling too, because the more you detail your model, the more natural it will look like. So you can't ignore any of the stages from the scratch, starting from the scratch, from the 2D plan, creating the model, adding the details, materials, and everything. So now this is a confusing part now. Why we do the lighting first and not the material, right? Now we already add these materials, of course, but then we do the lighting first, and then we do the material stuff. So every material has its own reflection index, own texture, bumps. That's a huge thing. So in your module, you have separate, in your course, you have separate modules for this. You have a separate module for lighting and material and texturing, right? Like that. You have categorized into separate sessions and modules. So now in just 1.5 hours, this is just a simple thing, very basic thing in interior lighting. There's a lot other thing we need to do, right? Like this light mix element here, there are other more elements. Just show you, right? Here I have just used this light mix here. Okay, we have lighting analysis, texture, depth, right? Normals, bumps, and specular reflections. All the render elements we can control separately. Shadows, matte shadows, and in the shadow category we have 4 types of shadows. Like that, we have this amount of, all these are we call render elements. So the first category is for material, and second category is for uh, textures, and this is for light, shadows, and these are reflections and refractions. So which means if I add all these elements, I'll get so much of channels. Channels, this is what channels look like. Now this is a fill channel, this is a sunlight channel. So which means I can save this image separately, right? One by one I can save this image separately in my computer, And then by using Photoshop, what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge all those separate channels and going to get a perfect looking final render. It's not just a single job. The post production is one more important thing in this ArchViz, right? Before we submit the render to the client, we need to work so many things. We need to adjust some manually adjust some exposures, contrast, and we can add some volume sun rays, sun rays coming from this window. We can add those sun rays by using Photoshop. We can add a human figure here by using Photoshop. We can have a small dog or a cat in this place. So like that, post production part is another set of precision. If you remember the 5 SRW, the last part is post production, right? So that you will learn at the end of the course program actually. Now that's how light mixer. If you have any questions, any doubts, okay. Now we can go further, but since we had a demo session, we can't go that much deep inside this lighting and materials, etc. But let's see. Um, I just want to render with all the materials in. Let's see how the scene looks like. So that's how the scene going to look like with all the materials. Now still, I think I never worked on any of the materials here. You can't see any reflections in this marble or in this chairs, right? So we need to work on the materials after this. So material working is, we select all the material and we have all the characteristic or attributes for each material, how it should reflect the light, reflection value and everything. That's a very interesting part dealing. There are so much of technical aspects in materials, how we use maps, right? So keep that in mind. You don't do light balance with materials on, or you don't do thousands of draft renders and choose the best. If you follow that specific standard method, you might only need maybe a 4 or 5 draft renders to get the perfect lighting balance, right? Okay, I guess that might enough for this demo session. I hope we will start the course from next week onwards. That's from, of course, from the basics, how the SketchUp works, the tools, and then after a couple of weeks we'll come back to the introduction of V-Ray. So from that, it'll be more clear to starting from the beginning, right? And same like the Lumion, of course. Um, Okay, I hope that wraps up this free session. Of course, you can contact the administration, the institute, if you want to continue or if you want to start this 3D visualization course from the beginning. So basically, as the ma'am said in the introduction, there will be three software. One is SketchUp, V-Ray, and of course V-Ray 5. This time we're going to give the latest versions, V-Ray 5, Lumion, not the 12, but Lumion 11 and 10. So you can choose the version that can suit your PC or laptop, whatever. And yeah, that's it. And of course, if you want to see the students' work, I didn't show the students' work exactly. So these are some of the best student works that we got from our previous batches. Okay. So with a beginners level that they learned, what we achieved is pretty much remarkable. They of course they did a really good job with all the lightings and materials, not just some uh, amateur works. Those are some really great works. And if you do follow that 5SRW and all the other techniques that we teach, you can still manage to get the renders like this, right? Okay then. So if you're interested, you contact the administration and you give us the feedbacks in the group, so we can uh, make these workshops even better in the future. So thank you for joining. We can wrap this up. You can leave. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.